growing up in Belize, I was exposed to several different ethnic groups, which is a normal Belizean phenomenon. And in that kind of exposure, I became accustomed to Maya people, for example, which is also an indigenous group in Belize. I grew up in a Maya village and I learned to speak Maya. And there was a mestizo community. Mestizo in Belize means Hispanic. And so that is also where I first became accustomed to Spanish. There was also an African Creole community that I grew up in for a while. So all of these different exposures got me into an appreciation of differences living with people. And then, of course, I'll also add that typical kind of Caribbean setting. I would have grown up with my father for a while, and then with my brother for a while, with my sister for a while. So all of these different households were around me. But what they left in me was a tremendous sense of culture, a tremendous sense of pride in the Garifuna culture, from the beginning right up to the end. So, and along, of course, with all this introduction was into the spirituality, the kinship, the food, and the language. I got trained in anthropology. So anthropology to me was just an introduction in methodology, how to relate to people, which is what I had been doing all my life. And I started off actually in archaeology. So I was able to get an appreciation for the past, methodologies of studying the past. And later on, when it came to doing my doctoral dissertation, I did it in social anthropology on the Garifuna people in my village, which is an unusual privilege. But that is what went into my formation. I grew up in Belize at the time of building a national identity against colonialism. So there was a lot of consciousness of Belizean identity. And a part of my training was done through the government effort to train Belizeans. That is how I became the first Belizean archaeologist. And I worked in archaeology, particularly in caves, salvage archaeology, for quite some time. Then I also became involved with indigenous peoples. This was after coming back to Belize to work, which was in 1982. And I started being involved in indigenous peoples organization actively in Canada, as a matter of fact. And when I was there doing my first and my second degree, I was accepted among indigenous peoples, mostly in Manitoba, along with the Métis. And that was my exposure to organization, working with people, building a kind of an advocacy. And so when I got back home, I came back with this fire. And I was also one of those first involved in building a Garifuna cultural group awareness. I should also say that Belize has the Maya, along with the Garifuna. The Maya, as you know, are the people who were, and still are, in that part of Mexico, Yucatan, Central America. There has traditionally been very little communication between the two groups. And even as the development of awareness has taken place, the two people haven't really worked together as easily as they should. And that's something that maybe we could talk about a little later on. So my involvement was mostly with the Garifuna. One of the things that I also became involved in while I was working in Belize, this time I was working with the University of the West Indies, which is Belize's university at that time. And I was responsible for the university in Belize. And part of the job was to do continuing studies, to be involved with distance education, community type education. And so to me, being involved in the indigenous peoples movement was just an extension of continuing studies. So not only doing Indigenous Peoples Organization in Belize, we also became involved in forming the first CARICOM. CARICOM is the organization of English-speaking Caribbean, which also now includes Suriname, and it also includes Haiti. So we were among those who were first involved in forming a pan-CARICOM Indigenous Peoples Organization called COIP, Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples. And through that linkage, we got ourselves talking quite a bit, traveling and finding out what was happening, again in North America, which was a part of my beginning, but this time quite a bit in Central America, South America. And a part of that involvement also became working with the World Council of Indigenous Peoples back in the late 1980s. The head office was in Ottawa. I represented the Caribbean region in the World Council of Indigenous Peoples in Ottawa. And that was when I first met my Tokayo Jose, when we made that visit to Cornell. And I was quite impressed with what I saw a little bit there. Just a little note, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the foundation of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples. And when it comes to these anniversaries, then you realize, I've been around for quite a while. So, the other thing that I will do very briefly is to give you a little introduction about the Garifuna, originally called the Black Caribs. The Garifuna people, there are some books that I've edited, I've written several articles, so I won't go into the details because there's a lot available on the Garifuna that I could also give you some references. But one of the reasons why I like this organization, this meeting, and this focus is that the Garifuna, I think, are one of the people who are very, very Caribbean in terms of the history. Formed in the Lesser Antilles from the Calinego people. And I was just talking a while ago with Leslie as to what is the origin of the Calinego people. Well, that is for the archaeologists, for us among us to try and explain. But the understanding is that they came from the area of the Guyanas, the Galibi, where they are Caribbean-speaking people. But the thing that we have to always keep in mind, that the Caribbean identity defies geography. I think that's one of the best ways to put it. Once you think that you've pinpointed where it happened, and then the people are different. And so you can look at artifacts, you can look at bits and pieces of material culture, but the people themselves keep changing. And this is one of the things that is most beautiful about this region. We're slippery. Also. Once you think that you've gotten them, and then they slip away from you. It's like fish. They keep moving from you. So, but here, the good thing is that we are talking about a region. We're not talking about specific countries, we're talking about a region. And that region is the Circum-Caribbean, which of course Rouse, Irvin Rouse, popularized some years ago. And I think once you look at the region, then you start beginning to understand the people and the linkages and the formation that they have gone through. So this is a rough map of the Caribbean. The Garifuna people were formed in St. Vincent, which is here, from the Calinego, who came from this area. As you know, the whole of the region was originally populated from various sources, including, of course, Yucatan, Central America. And I'm going over a long, long period of time. but the formation took place in St. Vincent from escaped African slaves, maroons, who mixed with the Kalinego, who were actually the island Caribs, call them the island Caribs. And let's move along here. The cultural transformation within 3 centuries of the colonial period was phenomenal, quite phenomenal. Within 3 centuries of the colonial period. We are now talking from, say, 1300 AD to the end of the 1700s. So what happened within those 3 centuries? Number one, the Kalinego mixed with the Arawakan peoples in the Lesser Antilles to form the island Caribs. That formation would have also been taking place even before 1300, as you know quite well. But this is where ethnohistory comes in. When you know for a fact that they were doing so, certainly 1300, 1200, around that time, because history tells us that when Columbus came and met the island Caribs, and they told him that they had arrived in the Lesser Antilles in the Eastern Caribbean about 100 or so years before him. So this is why I'm putting 1300 as an approximate time. But with us, as I said earlier, we can't go on specific times or specific places. So that was one mixture, the Kalinego with the Arawak, or the Taino. And then the island Caribs mixing with the escaped African slaves to form the Black Caribs. That's another issue. How do we get into that? The original version was these 2 Spanish slavers, ships that got shipwrecked around 1635, and they coming in from Nigeria, presumably at that time the general area of Nigeria, and slaves breaking loose and going on to St. Vincent and mixing with the island Caribs. I myself put far more emphasis on the fact that St. Vincent was almost free territory at the time by virtue of the relationship between France and Britain and the treaties that they signed, so that there was a lot of Maroons coming in to St. Vincent from Barbados, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and other parts of the Eastern Caribbean. That to me is far more meaningful. And there were just waves and waves of blacks coming in and mixing with the island Caribs. At the same time, there were animosities with French and British over land from 1600s on to the 1700s in St. Vincent. What happened as a part of this, again, transformation was a complete building of a new people, which is the Garifuna, called the Black Carib. This is a new phenomenon, relatively new phenomenon. People joining, taking over elements from both cultures, and in such a way been analyzed over and over again. The language that I was talking to you earlier, for example, is certainly Taino, to a large extent Taino. Our culture, material culture, to a large extent, is certainly, again, Taino. The belief systems, there's a wide mixture. So the benefit of looking at my culture is to say that it was formed and it is still forming, still going through changes. But the basic root of this culture is certainly Lesser Antillean Eastern Caribbean. And to us, we regard ourselves as a nation, a people with a history, with a sense of identity, a very, very strong sense of identity. So there was the eventual defeat of the Garifuna in 1797, and the idea was to kill them out completely. This was going to be it, because the British wanted the island. St. Vincent was supposedly one of the most rich in soil. for sugarcane. And the British came, and well, the island was too small for the British and ourselves. And they decided, okay, we're going to ship you away to Central America. Actually, they had different ideas, back to Africa, all kinds of things. But the one that eventually won over was to put them to Central America. Because at that time, Central America was claimed by both the British as well as the French. Sorry, as well as Spanish in this case. So what the British thought is that once these people arrive there, heaven knows, they could die, but the fact is that they won't be here in St. Vincent. Whole and behold, we didn't die. And the next few slides are going to go into more information. So we are here as a miracle, if you want to put it this way. Okay, the Central American period, 1797 onwards to now. There are about 350,000 of us in 4 countries, out of a seed population of a little over 2,000 in 1797. There are now over 350,000 out of natural reproduction, but the fact that we kept adding people into our mix, and we've used the term Garifunize them. So this could be Maya, they could be Mosquito, they could be Mestizo. Once we took them in, we made them Garifuna. And so that added to our numbers. It's a black minority, and those of you who know Central America, Latin America generally, blacks don't have any place, very few resources. Since 1950s, massive immigration to North America, where half of the population now reside. So half of the 350,000 are found in Chicago, New York, Miami, Los Angeles. And so the question is, with all of this, how do you regard yourself as indigenous? And this is the topic that I will go into in more detail when we have the symposium. I'll just give you a few bits of information. And I'll be focusing on resisting de-indigenization. Let's see what's on the other slides. The resistance has been, let us start off with what gave us the sense of national identity. Again, it was in the Eastern Caribbean, and to a large extent, it came from the Kalinago. And because the Kalinago were a fighting people. They were coming in from South America. They were late in coming in. But they came in with this sense of we are one. And that sense of oneness, a sense of where we came from, we inherited from the Kalinago. And it has been what has made us indigenous to a large extent. This consciousness of one people and fighting opposition to survive. That has been what really, really made us. Very briefly, our contribution to the cultural legacy. Number one, I would say is an imprint of cultural ethnicity from 1300, thereabouts, notwithstanding genocide, exile, and now living in poverty. In other words, there is, like almost built into your DNA, this opposition, fighting opposition all the time from forces that are around you. And automatically it means that you have to stand up and be one, and then start relying on each other as much as possible, wherever you are. So, strong sense of small social organization, community, family, genealogy. Most Garifuna people can trace their genealogy 4 or 5 generations easily. A sense of continuity. And whenever they arrive in Chicago, the first thing they look for is their relatives, because they're there. And automatically, this sense of being together kicks in, and it goes as a way of making living. So, and I'm calling it an imprint. It's an imprint of cultural ethnicity. The other one is intermixture with Africans. Okay, these are questions, huh? These are questions. If we're saying intermixture with Africans, then what the Garifuna are presenting are issues as to how it happened, where, and what results. This is, again, possible to identify through the written record, a lot of oral tradition, which is quite strong. And because this is a way of life in the Caribbean, there is the African within the Caribbean. So this is an example, and I think we need to look at that example to be able to appreciate the wider dispersal and the wider integration of the African into our region in the Caribbean. Just incidentally, this is the UN declared Decade of Afro Descendants, and the summit was held in a Garifuna town, predominantly Garifuna town, La Ceiba, in Honduras. Not predominantly Garifuna, but it's a lot of Garifuna influence there. The summit, which was held last year at the UN level, took place in La Ceiba, Honduras, where the Garifuna were pretty much in charge. And La Ceiba and the organization that was involved in it, ODECO, Organización de Desarrollo Étnico Comunitario, continues to be active in the decade. So that, in a way, is our contribution. And we are looking forward to making sure that it continues, that kind of high-level contribution continues. One of the things that comes from our experience is also, as a part of the legacy, is to understand the community, particularly gender roles. Gender in North America, well, it used to be women's rights until it became gender, because then the thing was, well, it isn't really only women, it's also men and women. But when it comes to, I think, the Taino, the circum-Caribbean, one of the things which runs through, if you were to talk of some cultural ejes, some cultural real kind of underpinnings, it would be the role of women, the fairly strong role of women in the Caribbean, usually said to be Afro, but even before the Afro, it was also quite strong among the Taino. And I think that this is an area where we need to look at very, very seriously, where we've contributed in the Caribbean. The Garifuna are a good case in point, and we need to know how it has been done. Another contribution to the legacy has been, acquiring the UNESCO 2001 proclamation. Okay, what does this mean? In 2001, UNESCO started something called heritage, oral and intangible heritage. Before that, it was all material. And when it was material, it was mostly, of course, Western, because you're looking at castles, you're looking at material, architecture, etc., etc. Until the United Nations said, look, but then we're missing out on the intangible. We're missing out on the intangible. And because of that, we're missing out a good part of heritage, human heritage. And so they started something called the Masterpiece of Oral and Intangible Heritage of Humanity. And would you believe, the first year they did it, the Garifuna won, if you want to put it that way. They were acknowledged as one of the masterpieces of oral and intangible history by UNESCO. It didn't come easily. And in our book called Garifuna Nation Across Borders, which I edited it, and despite the fact that I was involved, it's still very good. So I would certainly recommend that you get a copy. It's available through Amazon. But there is a chapter in it explaining how the Garifuna won this proclamation, and it really is worth it.
Well, in relation of the language, that I think the Garifuna language might be like the last Taino spoken language near, and then how do you see the actual language in comparison with the Raymond Breton's grammar and dictionaries?
Okay. I read Breton. It's like I'm reading modern day Garifuna. Absolutely no difficulty at all. From a few changes, as you know, historical linguistics, certain kinds of changes, sounds are going to change. But for us, it is easily understood. So, and I do agree with you that this is why I said you have to look at this region. Then you start understanding different examples of what the region has. And Garifuna is only one example. It is an example that I know quite well, but I'm certain that if you know it, if you know that particular culture, then you could also look at what is happening throughout the region, what has been happening throughout the region. But the fact is that it is the one language right now which represents quite a bit of the Taino elements. Yeah.
You mentioned COIP, and I applaud you for all the work that you did in founding that. But I've seen a real, I guess, a depreciation in involvement of Garifuna from Belize in COIP over the years. And just recently, there are a remnant Garifuna population or Black Carib population in St. Vincent today. How do you see that relationship continuing or emerging? And because in St. Vincent also there's this idea, it comes to this whole thing of labeling, right? You know, the Black Caribs, but then there's the yellow Caribs in St. Vincent, and then people talk about the Garifuna but forget about the yellow Carib, and you know, so much of that. Like, can you expand on that? Because I don't know if everybody's aware of these intricacies.
All right. First of all, let me start off by saying that my last communication with Jose, or the renewed communication with my Tocayo Jose, came when he saw my name in a gathering at St. Vincent that took place in February, March this year. They asked me to be the guest speaker to give the feature address at this particular meeting. This meeting is fascinating because this meeting signaled the effort in St. Vincent to reincorporate the Garifuna as much as possible back into themselves. And I say that deliberately because there had been this division based on supposedly color. And you have to say supposedly color. And this is a legacy of colonialism. Because when the British shipped a little over 2,000 of us from St. Vincent to Central America, in those 10 ships, there were also yellow Caribs. What the British failed to realize that in one family you can have yellow, you can have part yellow, you can have full black, which is a way of life for all of us. I have relatives in all kinds of hues. So again, but the racism becomes integrated into the culture and starts dividing people against each other. So it's a reality in St. Vincent, without a shadow of a doubt. But this is a time when apparently they're trying to bridge that. And so they're trying to work in St. Vincent on that issue. They're looking very seriously at what they call the diaspora, which is a very interesting term, because the culture has almost died completely in St. Vincent, very much alive in Central America, and in the diaspora from Central America, which is in New York, Chicago, and Houston, and Los Angeles. But my brothers and sisters in St. Vincent are calling me diaspora. I don't have any difficulty with that. But they are asking that we now go back to bring back the culture to St. Vincent. I don't have any problem with that either. I'm willing. That has been the whole aim of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples. It was started 25 years ago, and for heaven's sake, it's only starting to be realized. This is the way how things are. You know, visions are put, and then reality starts kicking in after a period of time. So history is extremely important. But to answer your question, it's fascinating. We cannot blame people because we are the victims of all kinds of things happening around us. Mostly, of course, at this point in time, divisions introduced through neoliberalism, which is another issue that, you know, it's affecting us, all of us. And if it means that we are dividing, again, that it is dividing us against ourselves, then it's up to us to realize who we are and how can we bridge the gap as much as possible. This, to me, is what is happening around here among us. This is why I had to be here, notwithstanding the difficulties of arriving. But the ancestors wanted me to be here, just to feel and to participate in this gathering. What we practice right now is the Degu ceremony, which is a healing ceremony that goes on for about 3 or 4 days. As a matter of fact, if this discussion, this gathering wasn't taking place, I would be in one for my family in Dangriga, Belize. It has to do with ancestor veneration. Extremely heavy, 3 days of music, dancing, eating, and sharing. So that relatives are going to be coming in from New York, from all over. And you meet people that you heard about as relatives, but you are now seeing them in flesh. When, again, this is a phenomenal region, and people who don't live in the Caribbean don't know what they're missing. When we arrived in Central America, in Trujillo, there are some Haitians there. The Haitians that were brought there to work. And we mixed with the Haitians. And a good part of the Degu ceremony that is taking place right now among the Garifuna has some Haitian influences. Nobody has done a serious study on it. Please. Please.